Hello Year 4, it's Miss Maylands. We're going to be doing some reading today. It's our first storytime video of remote learning and we're going to be reading chapters 2 and 3 of The Firework-maker's Daughter. You might have already read some of chapter 2, that's completely fine, we're just going to do a little recap. So here's my copy of The Firework-maker's Daughter. If you've got a copy at home, feel free to read along. If not, I'm going to have the book open here on the screen for you to look at as I read. Chapter 2. Next morning, while Lalchand was at the paper merchant's buying some cardboard tubes, Lila went to the elephant house to see Chulak. When she heard what Lalchand had told him, she was furious. Mount Marapai, Razvani, the royal sulphur, and he wasn't going to tell me. Oh, I'll never forgive him. That's a bit drastic, said Chulak, who was busy making the elephant ready for his new job. He's only thinking of you. It's dangerous after all. You wouldn't catch me going up there. Huh, she said. It's all right to let me make golden sneezes and Java lights, I suppose. Little baby things. But not to let me become a real firework maker. He wants me to stay a child forever. Well, I'm not going to, Chulak. I've had enough. I'm going to Mount Marapai and I'm going to bring back the royal sulphur. And I'll set up as a firework maker on my own and put my father out of business. You see if I don't. No, wait, you ought to talk to him. But Lila wouldn't listen. She ran straight home, packed a little food to eat and a blanket and a few bronze coins, and left a note on the workshop bench. Dear Father, I have completed my apprenticeship. Thank you for all you have taught me. I am going to seek the royal sulphur from Razvani, the fire fiend, and I shall probably not see you again. Your ex-daughter, Lila. Then she thought she should take something to show Razvani her skill, and packed a few self-igniting crackle dragons. One of the last things she had invented was a new way of setting them off. You just had to pull the string instead of setting light to them, because the string was soaked with a solution of fire crystals. She put 3 of them in her bag, took one last look around the workshop, and slipped away. When Lalchand came back and found her note, he read it with horror. "Oh, Lila, Lila, you don't know what you're doing," he cried, and ran out into the alley. "Have you seen Lila?" he asked the fried prawn seller. "She went off in that direction, about half an hour ago." "She had a bundle on her back," added the batik painter. "Looked as if she was going on a journey." Lalchand hurried after her at once. But he was an old man with a weak heart, and he couldn't run fast, and the streets were crowded. Rickshaw drivers jostled with bullock carts, a caravan of silk traders was pushing its way through the market, and in the grand boulevard a procession was going past. The crowd was so thick that Lalchand couldn't move any further. The reason for all this excitement was that the white elephant was being led to his new owner. Chulak was leading Hamlet at the head of the procession, and with them came musicians playing bamboo flutes and banging teak drums, and dancers swaying and snapping their fingernails, and a troop of servants with tape measures ready to measure Hamlet's new home for the silk curtains and velvet carpets the owner would have to buy. Flags flapped and banners waved in the sunlight, and the white elephant shone like a snowy mountain. It's a fantastic simile. Lalchand forced his way through the crowd to Chulak's side. "Did you tell Lila about Razvani and the royal sulphur?" he panted. "Of course," said Chulak. "You should have told her yourself. Why?" "Because she's gone, you wretch. She's gone off by herself to Mount Marapai and she doesn't know the rest of the secret." "Is there more then?" "Of course there is," said Lalchand, struggling to keep up. "No one can go into the fire fiend's grotto without protection. She needs a flask of magic water from the goddess of the Emerald Lake, otherwise she'll perish in the flames. Oh, Chulak, what have you done?" Chulak gulped. They were nearly at the house of the white elephant's new owner, and they had to slow down to allow all the dancers and musicians and flag bearers to get through the gate first and form 2 lines for the white elephant to walk between. Then Hamlet whispered, just loud enough for Chulak to hear, "I'll find her. Help me get away tonight, Chulak, and we'll go and take Lila the magic water." "Good idea," whispered Chulak, beaming. "Just what I was going to suggest." He turned to Lalchand and said, "Listen, I've got a proposition. Me and Hamlet'll find her. We'll get out tonight. Emerald Lake, goddess, magic water, Mount Marapai, nothing to it." Then Chulak turned to the servants. "Mind out the way," he called. "We've got to get him round the corner. Dear, dear, what a narrow gate. That'll have to come down. And what's this? Gravel? You want the white elephant to walk on gravel? Fetch a carpet at once. A red one. Go on. Hurry. He clapped his hands, and the servants bowed and scampered away. In the background, the new owner was tearing his hair. Chulak whispered to Lalchand once more. Don't worry, we'll get away tonight. All we need is a tarpaulin. A tarpaulin? Whatever for? No time to explain now. Just bring one to the gate tonight. And Lalchand had to make do with that. He went back to the workshop, feeling heavy-hearted. All this while, Lila had been making her way through the jungle towards the sacred volcano. Mount Merapi lay far to the north, and she had never seen it until, late that afternoon, she came to a bend in the jungle path and found herself beside the river. The size of the great mountain made her gasp. It was far away, on the very edge of the world, but even so it reached halfway up to the sky, with the bare sides rising in a perfect cone to the glowing crater at the top. From time to time the fire spirits who lived there rumbled angrily underground and threw boiling rocks high into the air. A plume of eternal smoke drifted down from the summit to join the clouds. How can I ever get there? She wondered, and felt her heart quail. But she had chosen to make the journey, and she could hardly turn back when she'd barely begun. She shifted her bundle from one shoulder to the other and walked on. The jungle was a noisy place. Monkeys gibbered in the trees, and parrots screeched, and crocodiles snapped their jaws in the river. Every so often, Lila had to step carefully over a snake sleeping in the sun, and once she heard the roar of a mighty tiger. There was no one to be seen except some fishermen laboriously rowing their boat across from the other side of the river. She stopped and watched as they brought their boat in towards the bank where she was standing. They weren't making very good progress. There were 6 or 7 of them, and all their oars were getting in one another's way. As she watched, one of the fishermen missed the water completely with his oar, which swung round and clumped another fisherman on the head. That fisherman turned around and punched the first one, who fell off his seat with a squeal and dropped the oar into the water. One of the others tried to grab it, but instead he fell out of the boat, which rocked so violently that all the others cried out in alarm and grabbed the sides. The man who'd fallen out was splashing and spluttering as he tried to climb back into the boat, and all the crocodiles basking in the shallows looked up, interested. Lila caught her breath in alarm, but the fisherman was so helpless that she could hardly stop herself laughing, because when the man in the water leaned over the gunwale, all the men in the boat leaned over that side to help him, and the boat tipped over so far that they nearly fell in two. They suddenly realised what was happening and let go, and then the boat tipped back the other way and they all fell on their backs. And the crocodiles slid off the sandbank and began to swim towards them. "Oh, pull him in, you stupid creatures," Lila cried. "Over the end, not over the side." One of the fishermen heard her and hauled the man over the stern to lie in the bottom, flopping and gasping like a fish. Meanwhile, the boat had drifted into the side, and Lila put out a hand to stop it bumping. As soon as they saw her, the fishermen nudged one another. "Look," said one. "Go on," muttered one of them. "You ask her." "No, it was your idea. You do it." "It wasn't me, it was Chang." "Well, he can't say anything. He's still full of water." Finally, one of them snorted with impatience and stood up, making the boat rock alarmingly. He was the stoutest man in the boat, and by far the most impressive, for he wore an ostrich plume nodding in his turban, an enormous black moustache, and a tartan sarong. "Miss," he said, "would I be correct in supposing that you were hoping to cross the river?" "Well, as a matter of fact, I was," said Lila. He tapped his fingers together with pleasure. "And would I also be correct in supposing that you had little money?" "A little, yes," said Lila. "Could you take me across? I'll pay you." "Look no further," he said proudly. "Rambashi's river taxi is at your service. I am Rambashi. Welcome aboard." Lila wasn't sure why a river taxi should have the name The Bloody Murderer painted on the bow, nor why Rambashi should be wearing no less than 3 daggers in his belt, one straight, one curved, and one wavy. However, there was no other way to cross the river, and she stepped aboard, trying to avoid the man who'd been saved from drowning, who was still lying dripping in the bottom of the boat. The others took no notice of him at all, but rested their feet on him as if he were a roll of carpet. "Cast off, my brave lads," cried Rambashi. Lila sat in the prow, and held the sides apprehensively as the bloody murderer swayed out into the current. Behind her she could hear the clash of oars, and as the blades banged together, the cries of pain as one man's handle struck another man's back, and the groaning and cursing as the half-drowned man tried to regain his seat. But she didn't take much notice, because there was plenty to look at on the water. There were dragonflies and hummingbirds and a family of ducks out for an afternoon cruise, and crocodiles practising looking like logs, and all sorts of things. But presently she noticed that the rowers had stopped talking, and the boat wasn't rocking unsteadily as it had been when they were rowing. In fact, it was drifting. And the oarsmen weren't entirely silent either. She could hear whispers. "You tell her." "No, I don't want to. It's your turn." "You've got to. You said you would." "Let Chang do it. It's about time he did something." "He's not fierce enough. You do it." Lila turned round. "Oh, for goodness sake," she said. "What are you—" But she didn't finish the sentence, because of the sight that met her eyes. All the rowers had put down their oars, which were sticking out in all directions, and each rower had tied a handkerchief over his nose and mouth, and they were all holding daggers. Rambashi was holding two. They all jumped slightly when she turned round. Then they looked at Rambashi. Yes," he said. "Fooled you, ha-ha! This isn't a river taxi at all. We are pirates, the fiercest pirates on the whole river. We'd cut your throat soon as look at you." "And drink your blood," one whispered. "Oh, yes, and drink your blood. All of it. Hand over your money. Come on." He waved his dagger so vigorously that the boat rocked and he nearly fell out. Lila almost laughed. "Pay up," said Rambashi. "You're captured. Your money or your life. I warn you, we're desperate men." On to Chapter 3, and I don't think much of Rambashi and his river pirates so far. Rambashi and his pirates managed to get the bloody murderer to the other bank of the river, but Lila had to fish another oar out of the water when one of them dropped it, and promised to sit still and not juggle the boat. When they hit the bank, everyone fell off their seats. "All right," said Rambashi, picking himself up. "Tie the boat to a good bit of tree or something, and take the prisoner ashore." "Are we going to eat her?" asked one of the pirates. "'Cause I'm hungry." "Yeah, we've had nothing to eat for days," grumbled another. "You promised we'd have a hot meal every evening." "That's enough of that," said Rambashi. "You're a pack of scurvy dogs. Take the prisoner up to the cave and stop complaining." Lila wasn't sure if she could run away just yet. Some of the pirates did look fierce enough to run after her, though now she looked more closely, she saw that their daggers were made of wood wrapped in silver paper, so they wouldn't be able to do her much damage. "I hope you don't mind this little transaction," Rambashi said as they walked along a jungle trail. "It's purely business." "Have you kidnapped me, then?" asked Lila. "I'm afraid so. You're going to have to hand over all your money in a minute, and then we'll tie you up and hold you to ransom." "Have you done it before?" "Oh, yes, lots of times." "What happens when you don't get any money?" "Well, we eat you," said the hungry pirate. "Shh," said Rambashi, waving his hand vaguely. "You're not cannibals," said Lila. "We're bloomin' hungry," said the pirate. "Have you always been pirates?" "No," said Rambashi. "I used to keep hens, but they all died of melancholy. So I sold the business and bought the boat." "Oh, no, shh, stop, don't move." The last pirates in the line, still grumbling, bumped into those in front, who stood behind Rambashi, transfixed with fear, for there, on the path ahead of them, was a tiger. It swung its tail lazily from side to side, and raised its golden eyes at them, and then opened its mouth and roared so loudly that Lila thought the very earth was shaking. One of the smallest pirates put his hand in hers. So there they stood, and the tiger was just gathering its strength to spring when Lila suddenly remembered her self-igniting crackle dragons. She took her hand from the small pirate, reached into her bag, and took out the 3 that she'd brought with her. "Mind out," she said to Rambashi, and pulling the string of the first one, she threw the firework in front of the tiger. The mighty beast had never been so surprised in its life. First one, then another, then yet another crackle dragon snapped and flashed and sparked and leaped at him, and that was too much. With a whimper, the tiger turned and fled. The pirates cheered. "Magnificent!" cried Rambashi. "Congratulations! I was about to stab him to death, of course, but never mind." Lila wondered how he would have done that with his silver paper-covered knife, but she didn't say anything. And of course, Rambashi went on, this changes everything. We can't keep you hostage if you've just saved our lives. You'll have to be our guest instead. Stay with us overnight, why don't you? We've got no food, said someone. What's she going to eat? We'll send Chang out to catch some fish, said Rambashi cheerfully, shaking his head at the protest that arose. No, fish is good for you. Go on, Chang, don't just stand there. I can't, said Chang. Look. They looked back at the river bank. The bloody murderer was drifting away, with the painter drifting in the water. Who tied it up? Said Rambashi. One of the pirates looked down and tried to rub a hole in the ground with his big toe. Said Rambashi. Fine pirates you are. I hope you're ashamed. But never mind, I've got a better idea. Miss, he said to Lila, rubbing his hands. There was a bright gleam in his eye. Can I interest you in a little investment? Well, Lila said, I ought to be getting on. No, really, this is a much better idea than piracy, Rambashi said. It came to me in a flash, just as I saw the boat floating away. I can't be cross with these fellows, they're like children, really. Yes, all my best ideas come in a flash, and this one's a corker, can't fail. Is there any food in it? Said a pirate sourly. My dear boy, it's built on food, just wait till you hear. I say, miss, just a little money, the safest investment you'll ever make. But Lila had walked away. As she went along the path, she could hear his voice behind her. Now, listen, boys, I know where we went wrong last time. I saw it in a flash, but this is an idea that'll suit your talents down to the ground. Look, let me draw you a picture. Lila would have liked to know what Rambashi's next plan was, but she was eager to hurry on. Mount Marapi was smoking and rumbling in the distance. She felt her heart lift when she saw it again. So powerful and dominating, and she thought, I belong to that mountain, and it belongs to me. And on she went, with no other thoughts in her mind but that, and an excitement putting a spring in her step. Meanwhile, Chulak was getting ready to smuggle Hamlet out of his new home. The master had gone to bed early, groaning, but the slaves were still awake, and Chulak had to distract them. Now listen, he said to them in the kitchen. You know you've got to do all you can to please the great white elephant, or else the king will be cross? They all nodded. Well, the elephant's a bit restless. He never sleeps well the first night in a new place, so we have to play a game of elephant's footsteps to cheer him up. You have to go and hide your eyes in the garden, and when you think you can hear him coming, turn around. He likes playing that. Go on, go and wait in the garden, and I'll tell him when you're ready. The slaves all streamed out of the back door, and as soon as they were hiding in the garden with their eyes shut, Chulak unlocked the front door and led Hamlet out to the gate. It's a good thing they put down that carpet I ordered, he whispered. You don't half make a row on the gravel. Can we go past the zoo? Hamlet whispered. No, of course not. Never mind Frangipani. It's Lila we've got to think about. And stop breathing so heavily. They tiptoed out of the gate and found Lalchand waiting there with a tarpaulin, just as Chulak had asked. What's it for? Lalchand whispered. For this, said Chulak, and made Hamlet kneel down to have it laid over his back, so he doesn't show up so much in the dark. Grumbled Hamlet. It's hot and scratchy and it smells like a marquee. Couldn't you find a nice blanket? I don't think you realise your own size, Chulak said. Do be careful, said Lalchand. I ought to come with you. It's not a safe journey at all. Oh, I should have told Lila everything from the start. I should have trusted her. What a foolish old man I am. Yes, said Chulak. Still, never mind. We'll find her. Come on, Hamlet. And they set off. Lalchand stood watching them for a minute until they disappeared into the dark streets. But someone was watching Lalchand. One of the slaves who'd come to play Elephant's Footsteps was hiding under a bush nearby, and as soon as he'd realised what he'd seen, he began to tremble. Helping the white elephant to escape was a terrible crime. There'd be a terrible punishment, and there might be a great reward for the person who pointed out the criminal. So when Lalchand began to trudge homewards, the slave silently followed him to find out who he was and where he lived. Chulak and Hamlet walked all night, and when morning came they slept in a little valley under some thick trees. They woke up in the afternoon, and while Hamlet browsed on the leaves, Chulak went to the nearest village to ask the way to the Emerald Lake. He came back with an armful of bananas and some news. Guess what, Hamlet? We're in luck. This is the night of the full moon. The water goddess comes out of the lake and grants people's wishes. Couldn't be better, my boy. Finish up your leaves and let's be moving. They weren't the only people going to the Emerald Lake. The jungle paths were busy with families carrying picnic baskets, and even a troop of monkeys was heading in the same direction. Just before the sun set, Chulak and Hamlet saw a young man busily pinning up notices on the trees beside the path. Chulak was about to read one when the young man caught sight of him. "Hey, I know you," he said, "and him." "We know lots of people," said Chulak. "Is this the right way for the Emerald Lake?" "Just along there. Here, can I—" The young man looked bashful. Chulak knew what he wanted. "Kneel down, Hamlet," he said. "Customer." Hamlet couldn't say anything with the young man there, but he gave Chulak a severe look as he knelt down. The young man daubed something on Hamlet's side with a stick and some mud and gave Chulak a coin. "Thanks," he said. "Wait till I tell the boss," and he ran off. Chulak read what he'd written. "Eat at Rambashi's Jungle Grill." "Rambashi?" Chulak said. "I've got an Uncle Rambashi. He used to be a chicken farmer." The notices on the trees were advertising the Jungle Grill as well. It was opening that very night, and there were meals at half price if you brought a voucher from one of the notices. "It'll be nice to see Uncle Rambashi again," Chulak said. "Come on, it'll be dark in a minute." They hurried on. Soon they came out on the shores of the Emerald Lake. Under the trees at the edge of the water there stood some houses on stilts with cooking fires and coloured lanterns, and as the tropical darkness covered the sky in less than 5 minutes, Chulak and Hamlet entered the village. Naturally, a white elephant with an advertisement written on him caused a sensation, and soon Chulak and Hamlet were being followed by a crowd of excited children and some older people with nothing else to do. Even the troop of dancers getting into their costumes for the ceremony couldn't resist, and the dancing mistress had to run after them with a mouthful of safety pins to pull them back and scold them. "Which way to Jack Rambashi's Jungle Grill?" Chulak asked, and someone pointed along the shore to where a wooden building stood on stilts over the water. There was a terrace with coloured flags and tables with checkered tablecloths, and lamps made out of wine bottles, and a cloud of smoke was coming from the kitchen, with the sounds of sizzling and bubbling and the smell of grilling meat and fish and spices. "Just in time, Hamlet. What do you think of that? And that's Uncle Rambashi," said Chulak. Rambashi, wearing a white apron over his tartan sarong, was ushering some customers onto the terrace when he saw Chulak. "Chulak, my boy, how delightful to see you! And your friend, your pet? This excellent mobile advertising billboard. Come in, dear boy. Voucher? Oh, don't bother with that. Free food for everyone, in honour of the ceremony of the full moon. Of course I'll lose money on it, but we'll soon make it up. Wonderful publicity. Yes, that's right, ladies and gentlemen. Free meals tonight." "What about us?" said a waiter. "When do we get our supper?" "Customers first," said Rambashi. "You and the boys can have as much as you like later on." "I thought you were in the chicken business," said Chulak, tucking into a big plate of prawns and rice and satay sauce. "Yes, but I had to give that up. I felt sorry for the hens, Chulak. So we took to the transport business for a while. River taxi, you know, with some freelance work on the side. But then came the opportunity to invest in the restaurant trade, where my trade talents truly lie, Chulak. Yes, madame, our grilled lake trout is exquisite tonight. May I suggest some saffron rice to accompany it? And a flask of jasmine wine? Yes, all free, no charge, compliments of the house." The Jungle Grill was certainly doing good business, or would have been if Rambashi had been charging for it. "I hope he knows what he's doing, Hamlet," Chulak said, as the elephant browsed quietly on the banyan tree that overspread the terrace. "He reckons it'll be such good publicity that they'll come back when he starts charging. I'm not so sure. Still, the food's good. Smoky, but tasty." Rambashi's cook was having trouble with the grill, which he kept having to throw water over when it got too hot. Clouds of smoke and steam kept billowing out, and the waiters rushed to and fro with plates full of dirty dishes, and flasks of wine, and menus and coconuts full of ice cream. Meanwhile, the village elders were preparing the lakeshore for the full moon ceremony. Chulak and Hamlet, full of supper, wandered along to have a look. The sand was swept and smoothed, lanterns were hung in the trees, and blossoms of all colours were scattered on the water. The path from the temple to the lake was crowded, several deep on either side, and Chulak had to climb on Hamlet's back in order to see. Then the ceremony began. A great drum sounded 3 times, and an orchestra began to play. Gongs and xylophones and drums and cymbals and flutes. A line of dancers came out of the temple and swayed down the path towards the lake, their fingernails snapping and clicking like fireflies, and their golden skirts shimmering in the lantern light. The head man of the village struck a light and lit a scented candle in a paper boat, which he floated out onto the lake. The incense made the air sweet and rich. Very soon other paper boats were floating out to join it, and then a little child pointed at the treetops on the far side of the dark lake and said, "Moon." The full moon was rising, and as it rose the music rose too, the gongs and the xylophones and the cymbals all summoning the goddess from the lake. And there she was. Though no one had seen her arrive, it was as though she'd come when they were looking away, and when they looked back they saw her, though no one had really looked away. She was floating to the shore on a raft of water lilies, a beautiful lady in a robe the colour of the moon, with silver rings and amulets, and a necklace of jasmine flowers. One after another the villagers bowed to her and asked for her help. This woman for a sick child, that man for a good harvest, these lovers for a blessing on their marriage. The goddess rebuked some for asking too much, though she never refused anyone in need. When they had all finished, and the goddess was about to depart, Chulak gathered his wits and shook his head because he was a little dazzled by her beauty, and then he thrust his way to the water's edge and knelt down. "Goddess," he said, "please hear me too." But before the goddess could answer, Hans took him roughly and hauled him away. "What are you doing, stranger? Away with him, defiling the lake. Who is he? Who gave him permission? Stone him, turn him out." Chulak struggled. He could see Hamlet raising his trunk and shifting his feet, and he knew the elephant was getting angry. "No," he cried. "Listen, I've got a special request. Just let me ask the goddess." The high priest looked down, frowning. His face was shadowed and stern. "How dare you come to this sacred place?" he said. "The goddess of the lake is not to be disturbed by your frivolous requests. Take him away. No, she shall not hear you. Be thankful we let you go with your life. Take him to the village boundary, and if he comes back, kill him." Hope you enjoyed our first remote reading session. That's the end of chapter 3. Come back next time to find out what happens to poor Lila, Chulak and Hamlet. See you soon.